guys for coming over, hanging out at the Shop Talk booths by Ink Kitchen, sponsored by our good friends at Hanes. Ink Kitchen is a...
Are you wearing Hanes right now, Brett?
Yeah, I'm wearing alternative apparel, which is...
What about your underwear?
No, I don't know. I'm not sure. It's interesting, though. It's something to think about. So Ink Kitchen is a company that we are basically just trying to give back information to other people just like ourselves. And we have a website, inkkitchen.com. We share a lot of information, news about the industry, tips and tricks about screen printing, and then we share a lot of our follies as well, as far as with all the fun mistakes that we make, which is nice to just know that we're all human, right? So we're here today in Long Beach to share information with you. We've got people talking all day long today, tomorrow, and Sunday to give you kind of just real world information from people that are doing the job every day. We have also another booth as you walk into the main trade show floor on your left-hand side. You'll see we're actually live printing these posters. They're designed by Aaron Draplin, who's a great famous designer.
Amazing posters.
And they're being printed by a guy named Andy McDougall, who is a poster king. And so they're great looking posters. Go pick one up. All the money that we get from selling these posters, we're donating to Surfrider Foundation here in Long Beach. So it's our way of giving back wherever we go. So
Brett, what does Surfrider do?
They do a lot of things with the ocean. Like their deal is, pollution and all that stuff, dealing with that kind of thing in the ocean. So, anyways.
So it's a good cause.
It is a good cause.
Well worth an amazing printed poster.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm really enjoying you being up here. So, this here is my good friend Ryan Moor. Ryan's going to come and talk to us about managing cash flow, which is something that we all do as a business, and as our businesses grow, sometimes it gets harder and harder because the dollar amounts get bigger and bigger. So,
Brett, I learned today in our first seminar that I was not your best friend.
Yeah, it's second best friend.
Second best friend. Yeah. Made me sad.
Yeah, you have to have an order. But some of it is based on tenure.
Okay.
Yeah. So, like, if you've been best friends with someone since you were like 12, it's hard to replace that. So, unless they just start being mean to you. Anyways, all right. So, Ryan, let's talk about cash flow.
So I'm going to start this off, and then I actually have a special guest with me, who's also going to come up here and talk. Our CFO named Dawn. Hi, Dawn. Call you up here in a second. So she's going to probably correct everything that I say, because she actually knows what she's doing. But we are going to talk about cash flow. Rick asked me to talk about this. We did a short talk at the last trade show, something that I presented at the Print Hustlers Conference last year, and something that as you're a growing business, you don't quite understand that you need. So we were really lucky when we started. I started in my bedroom without a college degree, built a website called silkscreening.supplies.com, which is now screenprinting.com. So anyone ever heard of Amazon? Amazon.
It's a river.
They have an amazing cash flow. See, anyone ever sell to Amazon? So be a vendor to Amazon. So we were a vendor to Amazon once. We sold DIY print shops. It's a little screen printing kit that you can buy on screenprinting.com for about $200. Amazon sold them online. So Amazon, when Amazon charges your card, when does that happen in this sale transaction? As soon as it ships, they charge your card. So when you get like one order and it gets charged, you get multiple credit card charges, that's because they're shipping multiple packages. So they do one credit card charge per shipment, but they hit your card as soon as that order ships. And with Amazon Prime, that typically happens within hours of placing the order. So they get that from your bank about 24 to 72 hours, depending on the banking relationship and the merchant relationships, and they put that in the bank account. Then they pay us, the vendor, about 75 to 85 days later. So that is what we call a positive cash flow cycle. Amazon,
doesn't sound very positive.
there was actually a Harvard Business Study review done on Amazon. So if you just Google Amazon Harvard Business Study review, you can read all about this. But Amazon lost money for like the first 15 years of business, and not just a little bit of money, but a lot of money. They were selling things for negative margins so they could compete in the market space. And yet, they grew. They kept growing, and they kept adding warehouses, they kept adding services. So how do you lose money and grow? Doesn't make sense, right? You have a positive cash flow. So even if you sell something for 1% negative margin, but you're growing at 10% a month, month over month over month, and you're collecting your money 75 days before you have to pay the person you owe the money for, you can pretty much grow as long as you want, as long as that growth cycle keeps up. And when we started at Ryonet, we were very fortunate to have a very positive cash flow cycle when we started. Because we were very much like Amazon. We did all of our business via e-commerce and screenprinting.com, and we collected money, and then we would ship the order, and then we would pay our vendors in 30 to 60 days, depending on the terms of the vendor relationship. So as we were growing fast starting out, we didn't have to have credit lines, we didn't have to have bank accounts, everything was just positive. However, two things that can happen. As your growth subsides, has your growth ever subsided at Printed Threads?
We have grown every single year.
But has it ever like been harder to grow the year before as the year prior?
Yes.
So keeping up that growth forever is pretty much impossible. You know, so at some time you're gonna have to figure out how to manage cash. And so as our growth subsided and we got into different types of businesses, so different types of businesses, for instance, if you're doing merchandise stocking programs for your customers, that's a different type of business than doing on-demand printing, or a different type of business than doing contract printing. So that is something that we changed when we brought the Rock equipment into the US in 2012. Those big machines cost quite a bit of money. We got to pay the factory before they ship. So when we start holding inventory, and don't collect the inventory until after we install it, not when we ship it, we collect it typically after we install it, that turns our cash flow to a negative cycle. Also, Allmade t-shirts. T-shirts are probably one of the hardest things to make because you have to secure the fiber, you got to turn that fiber into fabric, you got to dye the fabric, that fabric has to go to a cut and sew house, that cut and sew house has to make it, and it has to ship to a warehouse. In order for you all to order plenty of shirts, like we're working with Samar, I think they're the, in our booth, they're supplying our district shirts. They stock very deep. Have anyone ever gone to a t-shirt wholesaler and they didn't have stock?
Yes.
They're stocking deep so that they can supply your needs. In order to do that, you have to have the cash to do that. So let's say that t-shirt sits in a warehouse for 6 months. That means you're turning it twice a year. Every 2 times a year, you replenish that inventory. So if it takes me 6 months to build it, and 6 months to sit in a warehouse before I sell it to you, and then 2 months to get my money as you're a terms customer, that's 14 months of cash you have to have on hand. And if you're growing, then you have to have even more because now you have to fund your own growth. So different types of businesses have different types of cash flow. So I'm actually gonna have Dawn come up and explain what a cash conversion cycle is. Hey, Dawn.
Hey, how's it going? I have a loud voice, so I don't really need this, unless you guys can't hear me.
All right, so I'm gonna pull up on screen here. This is an operating cycle. So can you, from an accountant's perspective, can you explain how to create a cash conversion cycle and how you think about that?
Well, I look at things as cash, what I have of operating cash, right? So when you guys look at your company, you're going to have your working capital. So a lot of businesses today have their operating cash that comes in from your receivables, or if working through an e-commerce, but then you also have working capital where you're borrowing from the bank on your AR and your inventory, so they're advancing on that. So you have to look at all of that together and then look at what's happening in your business as you're running it. So receivables, for those that have receivables, most normal terms are 30 days. So by the time you sell to the customer, you're going to get your payments within 30 days from the customer. As long as your payables, in this case, we're saying payables here is 71 days. So we're collecting our cash before our payables are due. But if you are extending your receivables out to your customers, if you got this, one-time customer, you want to extend them 90-day terms, 180-day terms, that's where your negative cash flow comes into play, because you're paying your vendors on an average of 71 days here. So as long as your collections are always before your vendors are due, then you'll have your positive cash flow. That's what you have to be looking at when you're putting your data together, and that's what we research on our side here in Ryonet, is I'm looking at what I know I'm expecting to come in, whether it's through receivables or through e-commerce business, what that cash is coming in versus what my expectations are for that week or that month, and looking at through whether it be 71 days for payables, but you have more than just payables. You have payroll, you have benefits, you have insurance, you have other things. And if you have equipment loans, then you have loan payments. And so you have to be not just looking at what's going out to your vendors that are due, but you have to look at your other commitments that you have to make sure that the cash flow that's coming in can meet those requirements. And that's something that you're looking at. Like, I look at it for our business on a daily basis. It's the first thing I do every day that I come into the office, is look to see how much cash do we come in versus what I expected to come in. And that expectation is based on our receivables, on our bookings, on what's coming through our e-commerce website versus what I'm expecting, and is that on course? Because our bookings can have a good indication of what our cash is coming in.
So it's what we call a leading indicator. So right here we have a cash conversion cycle, which is actually, so a negative cash conversion cycle is a good thing.
Yes.
So a positive when this is, it takes you, so basically this is, I'm collecting money 36 days sooner than I have to pay it. So it's a negative cash conversion cycle, which is actually a positive thing. Kind of like debits and why are all accountants like everything's backwards?
Hey, at least it's not the government. That's
debits
backwards.
and credits, negative cash conversion cycles are actually a positive thing. I don't understand. This is why I'm not an accountant. So the trick is to work with vendors and to make sure that, and customers, so it's a vendor and customer relationship, that you're collecting money sooner than you're having to pay it out. And if you do that, you can really grow your business without having to get a lot of funding in the background.
Mm-hmm. No, I would agree with that. It's always good to have a backup plan, because in business is business, and there are always going to be unexpected things that come up. That's just the reality of life. It's in our personal lives, and it's in with the business life. So a working capital is always, as long as, depending on what you're borrowing off of, most banks borrow off of AR and inventory, and as long as you know you're there, then that working capital can help you with unexpected things. And so because your receivables, the biggest thing for a company is to make sure you don't overextend your customers. Because you want to stay true to yourself, you want to stay true to your customers, so you don't want to overextend them, you don't want to overextend their credit limit that they can't handle the terms that you've given them, and you don't want to overextend them by saying, here, let's go 90 days, let's go 180 days, because that's just too long for yourself. It's great for them. We want to do that. So what you always want to do, right, is to push out your vendors as far as possible and collect as fast as you can from your customers. That's always the goal. And that's just not always reasonable, but that's always the goal.
So there's some really cool programs out there, and like Dawn said, it's good to have backups. So whether it be with your bank having a line of credit that once things slow down, and maybe during the Christmas season you don't get paid quite as fast, or you have to bulk up your inventories, you have to pay for that inventory sooner, you have that line of credit. There's also like PayPal does similar things, PayPal working capital. As well as there's a company called Credit Key that does a really good job of giving credit facilities for you to use for your business and your vendor relationships, whether it be ordering t-shirts, ink, or whatever you might need to run your business without having to pay for it right away. Obviously fairly similar to a credit card, but without having to pay the interim interest fees. So any questions for Dawn while she's up here?
Good.
Yeah. So I'm going to change the slide. Awesome. Thank you, Don, for explaining that. I still don't understand the positive and negative thing. All right. So got a couple minutes left. One of the things that I think is awesome about this industry is the fact that we typically don't have to have a lot of inventory. So if you can keep your inventory to low level and not do stocking programs for your customers, do on-demand shipping with your vendors, you're really not going to have a cash flow problem. This is an example over here on the left-hand side of a company that is actually having, the revenue is $1 million, let's say this is in a month. The cost of goods sold is $750,000. So that means the gross profit margin they have before their expenses is $250,000. However, they have $260,000 of expenses. So they're actually on their P&L losing $10,000 a month. However, let's say that company is growing at an extrapolated growth rate of 10%, and they have a positive cash conversion cycle. So that means I put negative 30. So that means they're collecting their money 30 days before they're having to pay for that money. If their revenue is $1.1 million, the next operating cycle, that means they have the same cost of goods sold at $825, the same percentage there. They have a gross margin of $275. Their expenses are appropriately the same at $290. They actually have, even though they made minus $15,000 on the P&L, they had $90,000 of cash available to operate their business. So because they have a positive cash conversion cycle and they're growing, you can play with that. So there's two things in business to play with is growth rate, but also profitability, because you can't change that profitability. You might be able to get through it in 1 or 2 months, but if it happens too many months in a row, you're going to run into trouble, obviously. Hard to get lending, and it's, again, you can't count on that growth rate happening again and again and again and again. So here's another example we started out with Amazon. You can see Amazon compared to Walmart, they're turning their inventory a lot faster, and their cash flow is a lot better than the other companies, allowing them to do what they've done in the marketplace. So really it's a game of being able to work with your vendors, work with your customers. I know a lot, customers, especially like schools, right? They don't have the ability to pay with a credit card. A lot of them want to go net terms. That's not necessarily the case. A lot of times all you have to do is ask. Sometimes they have an operating card they're able to use. So even if you're getting 50% of the money up front and billing the rest of it on net terms, you're still changing that cash position for your company in a much better direction. Sweet.
I have something to add to that. For some reason, someone set this standard in our industry that what you do is you get 50% of the money up front, then you print the t-shirts, and then you ship them. And it's just kind of backwards, because we're spending a lot of money before the customer gets the shirts, right? So we actually changed our policies this last year to 100% up front to really help out with our cash flow. Obviously, we still have a lot of net terms clients, and our net terms clients are our biggest clients. So we have a huge amount of money in receivables at all times. But getting 100% up front from the people that are not net terms clients has really helped us manage our cash flow.
How do you do collections?
I do it personally, so every Monday we print out our receivables list and we contact the customers that are past due. And unfortunately, we have some really big the bigger the customer, the longer they are past due. It seems like, they're making money with our money, right?
They're playing that cycle. So what are some of the things that you've done to mitigate that as you guys have grown?
To get people to pay us faster?
Pay us faster, or making sure that you're not leveraged too much with those bigger customers?
Just having a consistent line of communication with the person that is paying the bills. A lot of times, you're dealing with a person that ordered the shirts in a big organization. You're not dealing with the accountant whenever the shirts are ordered. So getting that accountant's phone number or email address, a lot of times I just don't even contact the customer anymore. I'll just call the accountant directly and say, hey, do you know, has this invoice even been submitted? Because that's the other part. Sometimes they forget to submit the invoice, and then, it's 45 days past due, and you call and say, hey, trying to get payment on invoice number whatever, and they're like, we don't even have that in our system. And so now we get to start this whole process over and wait forever for them to cut checks. Making phone calls, being nice is good. And making phone calls calling the right person, and just kind of like, we never really hold anything over anybody. I don't think I've ever held an order or done something to screw over our customer, just because I feel like that'll keep them from paying me even more.
Yeah, I think one thing that you said there is really important, and that's communication. So communication both ways. So what we're looking for is somebody that gives people terms. We want good communication. So if we have good communication from a client, we understand that things happen, and you might only be able to pay us part of your bill, or maybe you'll be able to pay us next week. But one way or the other, if you're not communicating, it's really, it's not the really best relationship that we want to have. So likewise, if we ever have any issues, we make sure to be over communicated with our vendors and always under promise and over deliver. So if we can only pay this much this week and that much next week, now we're at least doing what we say we're going to do, and then they believe us next time we have one of those situations.
We used to do a ton of music festivals, and we would be at the music festival, and if attendance was low, I'd be like kind of freaking out, like, oh man, they're not going to pay their bills, are they? But reaching out that hand and saying, hey, I know the festival didn't go well. Can we, you're probably not going to be able to give me all the money like when you said you were, but could you make payments? Being reasonable, right? They're in a tough spot. Work out something to help them pay you.
Checks in the mail, right?
It's always in the mail.
Has anyone ever heard that before? Checks in the mail? Want to hear a trick? Who processes ACH? So three people. This is something that your bank will probably set up for you. And it's not expensive to set up. So basically, when they say checks in the mail, please send me a picture of that check. Plug it in, get the money right away. So, water. It's also really nice, and you don't have to pay a fee. So at ACH, what is it, 25 cents? 7 cents? So we pay our bank 7 cents to process a check versus a 2.5% to 3% credit card fee. So if you're not doing ACH, definitely get that set up with your bank. And all you need is the routing number and the account number and the customer's permission, obviously, to run their ACH. But it's much faster and quicker and safer than actually dealing with checks.
Every year I get really upset about the amount of money that we pay in credit card processing fees. And there's this happens once a year. I'll say, why don't we just raise our prices 3% to cover for it? And then someone reminds me, we did that last year.
I mean, that's something that we actively do to keep our credit card fees down, is we actually go out and set people up on terms or ACH payments so that we can get a draft without having to hit that credit card fee. So.
All right, cool. Any questions from the audience? We can answer one.
One question.
Does anyone have one question? It better be a really good one because there's only one. Is it good? All right. What are the best 3 things you can do when you get back to the shop on Monday to improve cash flow?
So, do you have ACH set up already? Okay. If you don't have that, I would start there. Second is, do you have auto billing with your credit card, with your customers? So in your terms agreements, just have it set up to auto bill, meaning that when 30 days hit, even if you're automatically doing it yourself, that's the way your agreement is, and you have their ACH on file, so that now in 30 days, on day 30, you're pulling the money out of their account, and they're not surprised about it either. So that's something that keeps from having the phone calls or checks in the mail. And then terms, vendor terms, I would either make sure that you do a list of your vendors, and on that list you list how much your vendor spend is and what your terms are. And when you do that, you have the ability to go out with them and either use your spend with them. Let's say your biggest t-shirt vendor doesn't have you on that big of a credit limit, and you're like, well, we could actually spend more money with you if you gave us either longer terms or a bigger limit. So look at your vendors, and then what's the third thing?
One of the things that you can do is, in a lot of business, the rule is an 80-20 rule.
as you have an 80-20 rule where basically 80% of your revenue comes from about 20% of your customers, or vice versa. 80% of your payables is from 20% of your vendors. Pull your top 80% of sales, pull those customers, and do the same thing with your vendors. Pull those vendors and start looking at how what are you doing with those customers? Are they cash customers? Are they receivable customers? If they're receivables, look at their terms, and then look at your terms with your vendors. Are they cash vendors where they require 100% deposit, or are they terms vendor? And compare the two from there and see what you can do to either one, like Ryan said before. If you have a customer with terms, don't have them push the payment to you. You go out and pull it. You go out and say, because you have them sign an agreement that when the invoice is due, you have the authorization on file, you go into your bank, you pull it out immediately, and then with your vendors, maximize whether you can go in and say, hey, I've been a customer of yours now for a few years. What's my pricing? Like, can you even get better pricing from them? Get a contract with them, extend your terms, see what you can do. Because a lot of times, even with 30-day vendors, you can negotiate 45-day terms, 60-day terms with them. And as long as your customers are faster than that, you'll have positive cash flow.
But always pay your bills.
Fantastic. Well, that's about all the time we have for Ryan. Thank you so much for coming and talking to all these people.
Check out the booth over there. At 4 o'clock, we're having a happy hour, and I'm not sure if you guys all heard, but at 5 o'clock or 5:30, there's a pretty sick show. So, outside. It's going to be fun. Rock on.
All right, thank you guys. Thanks for attending the Shop Talks with Ryan Moor.